Hi cookie lovers, I'm Ashley and I thought that I would go back to the beginning. What I mean by that is today I want to talk about how I make my dough. So to get started, we're going to look at what ingredients we need to actually make our dough. So first we're going to need our flour. So I have that in this Tupperware down here. We're going to need our powdered sugar. Now I like to use powdered sugar versus granulated sugar or any other type of sugar that there is. I think it gives you a much smoother cookie. You're going to need baking powder. You're also going to need your flavoring. For these cookies I'm doing a mix of almond and vanilla. You're also going to need some butter, an egg, as well as some salt. Now, just to note, if you use salted butter, then you do not need the salt. I use unsalted butter, and therefore I'm going to add the salt. And whatever salt that you have, this happens to be what I have. It's salt from Utah. Thank you to my mom for getting that for me. In terms of what materials you're going to need to do all of these, to make the dough, you're going to need your mixer, obviously. If you don't have a KitchenAid, you don't need one. It's not a big deal. You could use a hand mixer. I don't recommend it. Or you could use any other smaller one. The first mixer I had was like this big. You're going to want to use your paddle attachment if you have one. This is going to be a lot easier to cream things, and it makes it easier once you start adding the flour into the dough. So if you have a paddle attachment, definitely use that versus using one of the whisk ones. So I'm actually going to put this one away. You're also going to need your measuring spoons, your measuring cup, as well as I recommend 2 bowls. I like to use glass because I just like the glass ones, and I got a lot of them when I got married. You're going to need a dish rag or a towel. Definitely use a clean one. Don't use one that's not clean. It's just unsanitary. But you're going to need this so that you don't get dough anywhere or everywhere. And then you're going to need a fork. And you're going to say, why do you need the fork? When you're testing your butter to make sure it's at the right temperature, a fork comes in handy. Other than that, I do recommend a Tupperware, having it close by so that you can quickly reach for it and stick your dough in afterwards, and those are all the materials that you need. So first things first, what I like to do to get started, and this I typically make a double batch of dough, and you could find my dough recipe on my website. However, I only need enough dough to make 24 cookies. I don't have a recipe that gets that exact, so I'm going to make a half of my normal recipe, which is the one that you find online, and that one will probably make, I don't know, maybe 30, 35 cookies depending on the size of it. So what we're first going to start with is our egg and our flavoring. Now, I like to mix my egg in a separate bowl, and the reason I do this is because if you crack it directly in the mixer, if you accidentally get a shell in there, then, well, you have shelly dough. So definitely mix your egg with your flavoring in a different bowl. It also helps for prepping, and it gives the flavor a chance to attach to the egg, so it yields just an overall better flavor. All right, so what I am going to do is I like to use equal amounts of almond extract and vanilla. So I am going to use a tablespoon of almond, maybe a tablespoon and a half, and then a tablespoon and a half of vanilla. And you can use any flavor combinations. It does not have to be almond and vanilla. If you don't like either one, then that's completely okay. I personally do like them. I think they're delicious. But I've also used all kinds of fun flavors. Blueberry, lemon, that's a great combination. Raspberry and lemon. I've done some hazelnut ones. So whatever you have that you like. And then we're going to set that one to the side. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to get our butter ready. So I actually just pulled these out of the refrigerator recently. So they are bricks. They're hard. They're not going anywhere. So what I'm actually going to do is stick them in the microwave. Now it's very, very, very important. Your butter temperature makes a difference on your cookies. Do not liquefy your butter. So these ones are not frozen, they're just a little bit cold. I don't want them to turn watery. If you turn watery, then it's going to make your cookies spread, as well as you're going to get your cookies that are a little bit more crunchy, and personally I don't like that. I like the nice even cookies. So I'm just going to pop these in the microwave on the defroster setting, and this is probably, let's see, a whole container is a pound, so this is about half a pound, but I'm still going to say it's even less than that. I'm going to say it's a quarter of a pound when I stick it in the defroster. That way it doesn't over soften it, and I actually might even pull it out faster than that. I'll show you exactly what temperature that comes out to once I come back. Okay, so I am back. I have stuck my butter in there. I actually ended up only sticking it in there for, I think, like 8 seconds. It's very exact, 8 seconds. So I'm going to grab my fork and I'm going to show you the consistency that your butter should be. So as you can tell, I easily can stick my fork in my butter. Now this is really, really important. If you can easily stick your fork in your butter and it's not falling off the fork, like you could wave it around, this thing's not coming off, but it was easy to get in there, then that is the right temperature of your butter. So I'm just going to drop this into my mixing bowl and do the same with the other one. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to prep what goes in this little container. This is going to be our baking powder and our salt. Now I live at altitude, I'm in Denver, Colorado, so we're mile high, so we're a mile above sea level. That does impact your baking. What I do for my orders or any type of baked good that I do, I add just a little bit more flour and I add a little bit less baking powder and a little bit of water. So for this, the original recipe that I used for these cookies when I was not at altitude was 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Now that I'm at altitude, I can't do that, so I have to use less. So I'm going to use a little bit less than half of a teaspoon. I'm just going to stick it in my little cup. I'm going to use about the same amount of salt, or a dash if you want to call it a dash. I go by dashes, so usually I just stick it in the palm of my hand and throw it in there. But for the sake of measuring, I'm just going to grab my little measuring spoon and stick about the same amount in there. Okay, so I'm actually going to set this aside with my egg and my flavoring. Then what I'm going to do is add the powdered sugar. Now for this particular batch, I am going to stick 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. So my cup. I am not particularly precise with this. I've always been pretty spot on with how much powdered sugar I stick in there. As for sifting, some people choose to sift, some people don't. I personally don't normally sift. Now that being said, the other day when I was at Sam's Club buying my ingredients, not these ones, but the ones before, there was a giant rainstorm when I was trying to carry everything out to my car. So even though the bags of powdered sugar were plastic, a little bit of water I think might have gotten in there. And so I ended up sifting all of my powdered sugar, because if water touches powdered sugar at all, it solidifies and turns into a rock. And if you put that in your cookie dough or in your royal icing, you're just going to come out with clumps. It's a mess. Don't do it. So in that case, or if you've had powdered sugar that's been sitting there for a while, I highly recommend sifting it. I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to dump that in there, as well as 1/2 cup. That's about 1/2 cup. So then I'll just put this stuff away. We're ready to go ahead and start mixing our sugar and our butter. You definitely want to do that first and cream them. Don't try to add the flour in until very last. So I'm attaching my paddle mixer. Now is where this comes into handy. What you're going to want to do with this is drape it over your entire mixer. Now the reason being is it's a lot of powdery substance in there, and that butter is really, really solid still. When you turn on your mixer, it's just going to make your powdered sugar go flying everywhere, and that's not fun to clean up for anybody. So I'm just going to put it on its lowest setting and let that go for a minute. And you can kind of check on it to see I still have powdered sugar flying out of here. I don't know if you can see the little powdery stuff floating around. I think that's good now. So as your butter will cream with your sugar, and it'll smoothen out completely. If it's not smooth, let it go a little bit more. You do not want it to be hard butter. If you have hard butter and you start adding your other ingredients and it's not incorporated all the way, then you're going to have patches of butter in your cookies when you bake them, and it's either going to make your cookies a little bit greasy, it's going to put a crater in your cookies, or when you frost them, you're going to end up with butter bleed, and you don't want that to happen. So I'll just let that go for now, and we'll come back when it's done. Okay, so our butter has creamed with our sugar, and I'll actually pull that up so you can see. It's a very nice creamy deliciousness. I am going to do something delicious and grab an extra spoon here and just take a sample of that. That's the best taste in the world. Try not to eat it all before you bake it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put it back down. But before I do that, I'm going to put my egg and my flavoring in it. So I'm just going to pop this entire thing. You'll notice, just as a heads up, when you put your egg with your flavoring, it does get a little bit cloudy. It's not curdling, that's fine. It's just fusing together. So I add all of that in there. I'm going to let it mix some more on low, and it will separate. I will tell you that now. It'll look like it's going to separate and get clumpy and it's ruined. It's not ruined. Just leave it for a little while, it'll come back together. So what I'm going to do now is add my baking powder and my salt to my mixture. Again, I don't sift it. I don't think I've ever sifted it. To me, it doesn't make a difference, but unless you've had it sitting there for a while, you'll want to sift it. So I'm just going to toss that in there and let that go for a bit. So one thing to remember to do every once in a while is to stop your mixer and make sure that your butter or whatever you have going on in the mixture is not getting stuck to the bottom of your paddle. You want it to be well incorporated. So every once in a while, just take a stop and kind of just clear it out. That way it's not lumpy or there's too much of something someplace. So since we've been letting that go for a little while, I think it's pretty well incorporated to the point where we could actually start adding our flour. Now, you'll have to excuse me, I make so many double batches of this, I don't really know exactly off the top of my head what a single batch looks like. I do know, however, what this is supposed to look like. So I'm going to estimate and say about 3 cups of flour. Again, check my website, it has the exact recipe. I don't sift this either. I'm just actually going to slowly incorporate this in there. Do not dump it all in at once. It's very important you do not dump it all in at once. If you do that, you could potentially overdo it. So I just add a little bit at a time as it gets incorporated. And the consistency that you're looking for in the end is going to be kind of like dry mashed potatoes. You don't want it to stick to your finger like mashed potatoes, but you want it to be soft enough where you could touch it and it'll come off of your finger. Like you could touch it and leave an indentation. I'll show you what that looks like here. Okay, so I've gotten to a point where I think that we're almost done making this dough. And the reason being is you'll know you're getting close to finishing when your dough starts pulling away from the sides of the mixer or the mixing bowl. So make sure to keep a close eye on your dough as it's mixing when you get to that point, because that means you're almost there and you don't want to overdo it with the flour. If you do, it'll just become a really hard ball and start falling apart, and it's not going to be easy to roll. The good news is, if you happen to overdo it, you can add a little bit of water to your mix, and it'll help it not be as firm. but you don't want to add a whole lot or else it's going to change the composition of the dough itself. Also know that when you stick it in the refrigerator, if it's a slightly stickier dough, it will firm up when you refrigerate it. I chill all my dough before I bake it, and when it refrigerates, it does get harder. So just keep that in mind. You might look like you have the perfect dough now, but it might be a little dry in the morning. That's okay. Or in the hour that you bake it. Just make sure to go back and add a little bit of water to it. So I'm actually going to stick my spatula in there and see if this is done. So when you're checking for the final, whoops, I'll put that back. So when you're checking for your final dough, you're going to go ahead and scoop as much as you can off of your paddle mixer. You're then going to get the bottom really well, because sometimes some of the flour will stick underneath there, or you won't mix enough flour on there and it'll be a little bit too wet on the bottom. Now, this is really super sticky. Let's see if I could try to make it sticky. That's too wet. We need to add more flour to that. So I'm going to just add a little bit more. And we'll see how that one, we'll see how that one turns out. Don't do what I just did. Okay. Let's pull that out a little bit more and see how that looks. That actually looks quite good. So I'm going to take this over to the camera so you can see up close and personal what this looks like. Because I'm not very good at showing you from that far. So you could see I can easily stick my finger on it. It has a little bit of stick, but it's not like going to pull off. And it looks like mashed potatoes. So that's the consistency that you want, because once it dries in the refrigerator, that's going to be perfect. All right, so what I'm going to do now is pull off the paddle attachment. And in a small Tupperware, I'm just going to put all of my dough that I've just made. Okay, so this is about how much dough was made. So this is what size of? This is an 8-cup Tupperware, and I probably filled it with about 4 cups of dough. This 4 cups is probably going to make me about 30 cookies. So that's exactly the amount that I needed for this order that I have today. What I'm going to do now is stick a Tupperware on it. I'm going to stick it in my refrigerator for about 30 minutes to an hour, and I'm just going to let it chill. I can go ahead and bake directly with this, and if I was going to do that, I probably would have added just a little bit more flour. But I am heavy-handed when it comes to adding flour as I'm rolling out my dough. So I'm going to stick in the fridge and roll it in a little bit. But other than that, this is how you make my dough. If you have any questions, please set them in the comments. You can also visit my blog for the full recipe, as well as please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. If you want to see more DIY videos, or if you want to see how I frost certain things, then please visit my Instagram at loveandbaking2018.